Well, welcome, Sinead. I am so excited to have you on today on your Badass Journey podcast. This is so awesome because when we met a few years ago, we both became wizards together, which is like, it's the funniest probably title I think I have as part of my credentials when we became Integral Agile Wizards. But we are way more than just that credential, and I'm really excited to have you on today. And I would love, Sinead, for you to just introduce yourself a bit to our listeners, and to also give us a little bit about your background and where you are today.
Okay, so I hail from Ireland. And I came to the States back in '98, which seems like, talk about journeys. That was quite a long time ago. But when I moved here in '98, I moved straight to Silicon Valley. I was hired into a consulting firm that was based out of the Valley. And I stayed there for I didn't stay there for about 8 years, but I was in Silicon Valley for 8 years. I've always been in tech. Started my first company when I was 18 and just loved being entrepreneurial, loved getting exposure to lots of different industry, and no better way to do that than to be in consulting and getting to travel. And then my consulting brought me to Europe. I was back and forth to Europe for a while, mostly in Germany. And then I wound up taking some time off, some badly needed time off for about 5 years. And in that period of time, actually, my husband, then my new husband and I moved to New York, which was supposed to be for 9 months, but we wound up staying there for another 8 years, which was not the plan. And in that time, I now had 2 babies. Interestingly enough, I think in that 5 years that some people would say took a beat from the journey, it brought me on another journey, which was I started writing children's books, and I got an interior design degree, which I had always wanted to do. So I'm certainly not I don't think any new mom is to kind of sit down and just let life go by, because there's actually a couple of things I think that happen when you have to re-identify who you are as a person, and that is you look at life very differently and you see the world through a very different lens. And I had a bucket list that I always wanted to do, and I'm like, what better time to do it than that kind of five-year hiatus, if you will. And then I went back to work, and now I work for a company called CA Technologies. It is the 5th largest independent software company in the world. We've got about 14,000 employees, about $4.5 billion. For those of you that are listening, if you haven't heard of CA Technologies, it's because it's mostly back end, right? It's all IT infrastructure and security. But 98% of the companies in the world use CA Technologies to run their businesses in IT. And I'm really blessed to run an internal practice there called Enterprise Agility, which is basically looking at the enterprise as a system and seeing what holds us back in terms of what makes us go slow and how we can get faster. And that can be anything from our egos and arrogance that we tend to trip over, to skills, to mindset. So it's all of those things. And Kareen, you and I are people/human junkies, right?
Yeah.
So I'm really lucky to find myself doing that every day.
Yeah, it's so amazing, Sinead, because to be able to be a entrepreneurial mindset as an entrepreneur now for such a large company that has so many dynamics when it comes to service and delivery and growth and impact, and that human factor makes such a difference, right? Like the focus on the humanity of it all and figuring out how that fits into process and technology. I love that space. I completely do.
Yeah, and it's been interesting for me too is, and I draw some parallels even, when I look at myself, okay, I'm one person, but I look at CA Technologies as big as it is as an entity, as one person, if you will, right? And the changes and the evolution that CA has gone through, like many companies, right? 40-year-old company
Mm-hmm.
that has had to re-identify itself, that had kind of redefined or rebranded itself throughout the years with new technologies, and just take a step back every now and again and say, who do we want to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are we
Mm-hmm.
trying to do? Who do we want to be in service to? What's our purpose, right? And it might be a big beast, right, a machine, but they're the same questions, right?
Yeah.
And you have to respond to them on a larger scale, but a lot of the same parallels I draw in terms of re-identifying and just evolving as a system, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and treating it as its own organism.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. And
Exactly right.
and feeding it, planting it, grooming it. Exactly. Yeah. Which is beautiful. I mean, I have seen a little bit of you in action, and I could totally, see what an impact you must have, especially leading teams, because you started so young. You just almost gave it like a sound bite. The fact that your first business was at the age of 18,
Yeah.
which you had to flex several muscles, I'm sure, at that point. But do you have learnings from that time, those badass moments back then, that like trigger even today certain activities?
Yeah, and actually, it's called. People that work with me and for me cringe when they hear this, because I call it the paperclip moment in my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so my paperclip moment is, and your listeners will maybe get a giggle out of this. When I started that first company back when I was 18, of course, I thought I could accomplish the world. Those of you that don't know me, I'm 5'2". I'm like 90 pounds soaking wet. So when I was 18, I looked like maybe a 10-year-old probably, right, with pigtails. But I thought I could do everything, right? And, when you're starting off, and I have 2 kids now, my oldest is 15, a lot of folks, and especially adults, say, and many risk adverse, it can't be done, you can't do it, nobody's going to pay attention to you. And I got all of that when I was 18, right? I had people telling me something couldn't be done, and that made me even more eager to want to do it, right? But I hired, probably in the first year, I had four or five people working for me, and one of those folks was my receptionist, right? Because I would have people come in and want to get our services. And I was out busy one day, and I came in, and she was on the phone, and I had to buy all my own stuff, right? These days we call it bootstrapping, right? In the startup world, but I was bootstrapping. I mean, I was literally, everything came out of my own pocket, and I didn't have any funding necessarily. So I would go to what is called Staples in here, but our local office store, and I would buy my box of paper clips, right? And they would be in her drawer.
Uh-huh.
And so I walked in one day horrified to see that she was on the phone, and she had a box of paper clips, and she would take each of the paper clips out as she was talking to whomever she was talking to, and she would straighten them and put them in a pile. Right?
Oh no.
Oh my God. And I was 18, but I tell you something, those were my paper clips.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's kind of the moment, because I said to her, "What are you doing?" And she said, I'm on the phone. I said, "No, what are you doing with the paper clips?" And she said, they're only paper clips. I'll never forget it. Right. I mean, It's a long time ago. She said, "But they're only paper clips." And I said, "But they're my paper clips, and I had to buy them." I've told everybody that's ever worked for me the paperclip story, because even though I work for a large corporation, or if you work for anybody, or even yourself, there is, in large corporations, you think of it like monopoly money. It's not my money, I just have to expense everything. But I do look at it like that, because when you have accountability and autonomy to own something, you have to look at it like you own it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, obviously I don't buy my own paper clips today in work, but I still have a budget, and I still have to, I have to purchase them. Right. And it's just a different way of looking, I think, through the lens of accountability, and not abusing it,
Yeah.
Every single person that works for me in CA knows that when they see a paper clip, they're reminded of, you know, what their responsibility is and what they're in service to. I don't know if that makes any sense.
That's beautiful. No, I love it because it creates a consciousness, right? Like
That's
so
right.
many of
That's
us
exactly right.
are walking through unconscious living.
That's
You
right.
know, and especially in the workspace, it can become so much that hamster wheel of just conforming and following and sometimes abusing, right? Like even when you sit at your desk and you're hired for something and you're having complacent moments, that is, you're lessening what I call the value exchange of why you're there and what you're meant to deliver against and earning that check. It takes an investment of your time as well as expertise in order to bring in that income, but then also that value that your employer sees in you is also exchanged back to them in the value you produce. So it's just creating that consciousness for in the object itself, you know, and especially, you know, we have a lot of listeners that are startups and entrepreneurs and just trying to figure out what is that mindset to go after what they truly want. We also have listeners that are in that track of wanting to advance in their work life and their career life and not necessarily sure how to go about it. And what you just brought up is beautiful. It's about being conscious.
It is. And you know what? It's something that I guess I didn't have the language for at the time, but my value system, right? And my value system, although it has evolved, back then, you know, when I was 18 years old and I was so conscious of wanting to be, obviously I wanted to be successful, but the way in which I had to do it. And when, you know, this other person was abusing that, I don't think they were obviously conscious that they were doing it. There was no ill intent in it, but their value system was different to mine.
Exactly.
And I think the badass moment for me in that was, you know, we went our separate ways very quickly, right?
Yeah.
And I needed to get somebody who understood the paperclip.
Yeah.
Right.
And it formed your value system too, the ability to articulate it, because I'd say that's the other struggle sometimes in humanizing work environments comes down to communication.
It does. And obviously if I had my time all over again, you know, when I think back at that 18-year-old, I didn't know necessarily to sit down and talk about, you know, what brand looks like necessarily, or you know, there's a lot of things I would probably do differently. But even then, you know, the value system that I had was the most important thing to me, you know.
Yeah, I literally had a coaching session. I'll share this with you because I think you'd appreciate it, where one of my clients was struggling about wanting to become a partner in his business. Mm-hmm. You know, he had been an executive and trying to figure out, you know, and how to stay on and become a partner in this firm. And when we were in our session, I mean, he was just so emotional about it. It felt like as if he was being undermined or overpassed. I don't know what the right word is, but basically feeling as though he wasn't being valued. He felt that all of this was, you know, he's putting everything out there and he's put a proposal together, etc. And I just had to stop him and ask him what is important to them, that have they articulated to you what is important to them, so that you can figure out that value exchange that makes sense.
That's right.
Because you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I, you know, I say this to people. Obviously, I do a lot of speaker events and sessions, and value comes up a lot. And clearly, you know, you and I have a lot of exposure to the agile mindset, where we talk about value all the time. And you know, one of the first things I say to people is value is subjective, right? Your idea of value and my idea of value may be different. Doesn't mean that it's any less value for you or I, but it may be different, right?
Right.
And when you are trying to create value for yourself, or certainly, you know, your customers, your clients, or whomever, you have to be aligned on what value looks like and ask the question, what value looks like for both of you. And if the alignment exists, it's such a critical part of creating that value system that you're working towards.
Yeah, and it helps you walk alongside people versus miscommunication that becomes sometimes combative because you just didn't understand
That's right.
what those values were, you know. So it's really great just to even dialogue on it, because I think it is a topic that if more people thought about that when they started to feel the triggers inside, right? Like the trigger of emotion, the upset, the anger, similar to, I mean, obviously now you have so many years of experience in so many different environments where that 18-year-old version of you and that lesson learned back then still breathes life today to quickly articulate your value system. It's beautiful.
That's right. And I even look at, you know, where I am right now and where I even was 18 months ago. You know, I mean, 3 years ago, we came back to California from New York. And, you know, now I have a 15-year-old and my value system is continuing to evolve, right?
Of course.
And I could sit down, you know, today and say, you know, what are my values today? Because they are probably, they are different to what they were 12, 18 months ago, you know. Sure. But it's asking the question of myself to be purposeful about saying, what do I hold valuable today? You know.
Yeah, that's beautiful. If you were to describe the I guess the environment or the challenges you love to tackle and find solutions for, because I know you're so solution driven, how would you describe, you know, what it looks like when you're flexing all your muscles in the arena that you work within?
Flexing all the muscles. I just had an image that was very, very scary. So let me think about that for a second. You know, there are a couple of things that come to mind. One is, and I don't know if I ever shared this with you, but oftentimes when I'm doing a session with a group of people, and I certainly like sessions, and you and I think are aligned on this, the physicality of certain exercises or activities, right, that we do when we're doing working sessions. But I ask a question oftentimes of people at the beginning and towards the end of a session, and that is, you know, where we do a constellation. I don't know if your listeners know what a constellation is, right? So you ask a question. Well, it's more of the declaration of a truth, and if it's true for them, they go into the center, and if it's not true for them, they go far away from the center, and it's all relative to that center point. But I ask the question, or declare the truth statement: I see greatness in me. And not many people go into the center, and I really struggle with that. Now sometimes, and I giggle a little bit because I've done it with different people in different parts of the world, and people get tripped up on, well, what do you mean by greatness? I mean this by greatness. Do you mean that by greatness? And it kind of, everybody overthinks it. And I'm like, no, like the value in you, like what impact you want to create in the world for yourself. And there are so many people that feel that they don't have the power to do that. And whether I'm working in a large company, whether I'm advising a startup, I really want to tap into that, because the life conditions that we find ourselves in are so complex. I mean, there's probably not one person that's listening to this that would say, you know, life has been an easy ride, or I just, you know, life is one. We all have something that can cause us to think twice about things, and look at life in terms of the challenging obstacles that we have. And so me flexing all my muscles really means looking at life conditions that I'm surrounded with, and how to smooth them out for people, right? Tapping into every single individual that crosses my path, and looking at ways to be in service to bringing their true greatness to bear. Whatever that looks for them. And I'm not talking about solving world hunger. Sometimes it's, Jesus, I just want to get up in the morning and be able to think straight with a cup of coffee in my hand, because I haven't been able to do that. I mean, seriously, you know. But there's a beauty in looking at that and and tapping into that, what that means for each and every one of us, and bringing that to bear and allowing the space for it to exist. It's and not to kind of overburden the statement, but there are so many people that I've met, even in large corporations, that just don't have a guiding compass. They go to work every day, but they're not sure what they're even doing, and it's quite tragic, really.
Yeah, it's that disconnect, right? Like they're disconnected from their truth of what they would have potentially wanted for life, or even just to ask themselves the questions. And it's beautiful that you can create a space for people to ask of themselves, what is am I great? What am I great at? Even what do I desire? What do I want? And as coaches, we tend to create permission, to dive in, to be received in a way that is welcoming, and no matter what they say, it's the truth to them. And you just are a reflection of saying, yeah, you matter, what you think matters, and there's value to that. It can be such a harsh world in the no, right? No, that's not possible. No, you can't do that. No, that's not it for right now. And people start to live smaller and stop dreaming because of belief in the no. And I love that that's where you feel you're strongest, is creating those environments, because it's so needed, especially in a group setting. People need to see it of each other too, right? Because when you dialogue with one, you're dialoguing with many.
Yeah. And I mean, even to extend beyond, oftentimes I may not necessarily, if I have the opportunity to create, fantastic, but often it's a case of, and it goes back to building the muscle or flexing those muscles, influence that space, right? And certainly in my environment, it can be rather challenging to influence space, the life conditions that people find themselves in. I say to people, what do you have control over and what do you not have control over? And we'll figure out the part that we don't have control over and see what that looks like, and if we can influence it in some way. But oftentimes I've met people who believe that they have no control over something they actually do, right? And can get rather paralyzed and kind of wear the shackles of that. And it's a case of asking the question, what is it that you have control over, and creating even a space for that beforehand.
Yeah.
They actually have more control over stuff than they realize often.
Yeah. It's funny because I constantly flex the muscle of what do I have control over, because I know I can take action faster in those arenas than what's new.
That's right.
Whenever I'm in and I coach my clients that way too, especially when I'm going into environments. Generally, I get called in to help deliver something or fix a problem. Like sometimes I'm considered the closer, like I gotta come in with those type of environments. And a lot of the times when I'm coaching executives, I say, well, let's define what you currently are in control of. 100%. What are you in control of? Because that arena you can impact right now.
That's right.
So let's get some wins, and let's get into action. And then it's like, okay, what feels out of control? Because I bet you if we start assessing and analyzing what feels out of control, we can find the mechanisms to bring it back in.
Yeah. And that's there's a model that I like to use. Not that I want to pitch the models that I favor, but there is a model that I like that's very consumable for any person. It doesn't matter whether you're working or you're not working. It's called the driver's model by a friend of mine called Michael Wilkinson. And it asks a bunch of questions, and I use it obviously from consulting if I'm in doing a strategy session with an executive, but I've also used it with individuals to say, and the question is asked was, okay, so where are you trying to get to, right? So the kind of the obvious questions: where are you trying to get to? Where are you today? And the interesting thing about where you are today, it's perception based, because it's where you are and where you really are, where you think you are and where you really are.
Yeah.
And then, the third part is, what's holding you back. And what's interesting about what you said, and I think we have to be very mindful of this as human beings, is that our natural lean is to focus on what's holding us back, right? To your point. And I have to say to people, we could spend all day in there, right? And that is our natural lean as humans to want to do that. But if we switch that to what are the things that are actually going to drive me forward? What are the types of things that can propel me forward? Then those that hold me back don't seem so bad, right? It's shifting the energy in the way we think about things to a large extent.
Yeah. Well, it's, it's a conditioning that started through schooling from a very young age. We were always told what we got wrong. And focused on what was wrong, why we didn't get the A, what was the missing points, and never the amount that was done, that was enough, that was great, that was amazing, because of that comparison model that's created so young in our lives. So the behavioral change that has to occur as we step into our adult lives, right? And we have that control. And we can flip the switch. It's a choice. It is completely a choice. I mean, I love letting people just remind them of that. Like, you are comparing yourself to a phantom right now. You have a choice to step into what exactly it is that you want. And it's a beautiful awareness, as well as permissioning, as well as strength, to realize that the 75% of the things that you do amazing are maybe 3 times more than the person next to you would accomplish, if you just focused on that 75% and not the 25% that's missing.
No, very, very true.
And I love that, because I hope people listening will benefit from that and try it on. Try focusing on your greatness, like you said, and that self-image that shows up, the perception then actually starts to match reality a little bit if you can focus on that.
Yeah. And I mean, I just to acknowledge too, and the fact that it's scary. It's scary to do that. I mean, we all have fear, right? And it's okay to say that. I'm afraid, or I'm fearful of this, or I'm fearful of that. Hey, if we didn't have any fear, then we'd be off doing lots of things and getting ourselves into trouble left, right, and center, right?
Yeah.
But again, not to let it shackle us either. It's finding the balance there.
What are your personal methods for combating fear when fear arises for you? I mean, I know you're a risk taker and you can jump into things, but it's all natural for us to have those sensations. Do you have any common practices for you to break through fear?
Gosh, I'm a real pen and pencil. I was going to answer with cosmopolitans, but then that probably would not be appropriate. But
hey, if it's real.
Outside of having a Cosmo, no. I'm a real pen and pencil girl. I mean, I am a risk taker. I've always been a risk taker, but I'm a smart risk taker, right? I mean, you have to be smart about making those choices. And the types of choices that I made back when I was 18 with, no mortgage, no kids or whatever. I mean, let's be real. The types of risks that I would take then are very different to the types of risks that I would take today. But having said that, I think there needs to be structure there. I mean, I tell people all the time, well, let's get a pen and piece of paper out and let's talk about, what, the pros and the cons to doing what we're going to do, right? And most importantly, I mean, there are a couple of questions that I tend to ask myself and to others. And that is when I feeling that I'm leaning towards wanting to make a decision. Oftentimes, we will, as humans, again, lean towards, well, here's all the good stuff that's going to happen, as a benefit, as an example, right? So I'm going to do this thing. Here's all the stuff that's going to happen. But the kind of the flip side of that is, what will happen if I don't do it? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, you know what? Because we're risk adverse, oftentimes we'll be like, oh my gosh, all this bad stuff comes into our heads and we kind of spiral into, okay, I'm not going to bother. But really, what's the worst that can happen? And oftentimes, guess what? Nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's going to happen. And so I think you have to ask that question, but you have to be calculated, right? So what do you have to give up as an example, right? What are you willing to give up? What are you willing to do? What are you not willing to do? I have to ask myself those questions every day when I'm making decisions, right? And it's being intentional about that. So that's what I step into when I'm making decisions today. Good big decisions and small decisions, right? It really is a case of what am I willing to do and what am I not willing to do. Am I willing to put all my money on the line and fear losing my home, or not being able to put my kids through college, or whatever that looks like for me? Well, no, I'm not. So what does that mean? Does it mean I have to throw it out, or does it mean I just have to compromise or modify my thinking a little bit, or start smaller than I planned? I will tell you, I am a kind of a grandiose thinker, right? I mean, there's good and bad in that, right? I don't like the little details. That's why I always surround myself with people that are the detail people, right? Because I'm all about the vision and let's send a rocket to the moon. Well, we don't have a rocket. Oh, that's just detail, right?
Right.
So I do have to have, balance around me. And I think that's important too, right? When you're making decisions, because if you're making them in a vacuum, then that's not good either, right? You want to have enough people around you, I think, that can support you in your decision making, that are in service to what you're trying to do without being the naysayers.
Yeah.
Right. But you want to have enough people around you that can help balance out what it is that you're trying to do. Being smart and intentional and asking the right questions. I think that's really where my head goes to when I'm trying to do things.
Yeah, and you're action oriented. So there's obviously like a threshold of the analysis you'll go through to decide whether you scrap it and say, you know what, it's just not a fit right now, get back to it later, or push forward and say, yep, it's time, let's jump in.
Yeah, and I will say I have to, because I know I'm a big thinker in that respect. The challenge with big thinkers is we're shiny object people, right? So we look at a shiny object and say, oh my gosh, this is going to be awesome. And then, we get the endorphins running and we're hoping to get it done. But guess what? Then we see another shiny object and we're now chasing that. So I have to say, I am very intentional about whatever it is that I'm trying to create, whatever it is that I'm trying to do, that it's attainable.
Yeah.
Right. That it, in some form or fashion, whether I have to do it iteratively, that it is attainable. I don't like to declare something into a space if I don't think I can do it, because I'm not the type of person that likes to have someone come back to me and say, oh, whatever happened to that thing you were trying to do, right?
Yeah, you focus on follow through.
I do. I'm that's where kind of the action orientation comes from me. There has to be follow through. And I like that in myself and I like it in others.
I love it. Well, thank you for sharing that part, because I think a lot of us can get stuck, and it's always good to learn new methods or different methods that might be a better fit on how to assess what's in front, why fear is showing up, or a scarcity mindset, and then taking action to move forward. So those questions are amazing, as well as the activity to write it, but then also make sure it's attainable, like what's that marker, or like the KPIs, right? Like if you were to go forward with it, like how would you measure that was worthwhile? I always love to share with folks, and I use the retrospective exercise that we have in our Agile practice. I use it in life all the time, because it helps me let go of the things that don't work or don't serve me, and it gives me a point of measure as well. And I think that's really important too, is part of the fear might be showing up because of overwhelm, like doing too much or having too many plates spinning and then realizing, oh, well, there's one that doesn't mean as much anymore. So how do I let that go? Which is great as well.
Yeah.
So as we close out our discussion today, and I'm sure we'll have many in the future as well, because I could talk to you forever. We're so aligned in so many ways. I'm curious how you define a badass. Like what words would you use to describe what a badass is?
Oh gosh. I have to share with your listeners that I was like, I wonder is badass in the dictionary? Like what would what would the definition of badass be in the dictionary? And it actually was, right? And one of the things that I saw in there was intimidating. And I was like, okay, so I don't want to be intimidating. I certainly don't want to come off like that, right? But I think badass is being intentional. I mean, you really have to, because I could, I often say to people, don't be like a bull in a china shop, where you go in and you're just not thinking things through, and, you're being, badass is not being about rude or arrogant or, speaking in a disrespectful way to people to get what you want. Because I think a lot of people will wear the cloak of saying, oh, I'm a badass, but they have all those attributes. And that's not what it is to me, right? Badass is about getting clarity around what it is that you want to be intentional about, and then paving the way for it to happen, right? The badass part is asking the question about, who do I need to have in my circle to make it happen, and being badass enough to build those relationships, get out in front of it and build the network if that's something that you need to do, right? Badass is about, if I don't understand something and I'm not educated enough, that I'm badass enough to go out and educate myself and build the knowledge so that I know what I'm doing and I'm asking the right questions, right? Yeah. That's what it means to me, right? Is stepping out in front of it, fear and all, the edge that we have, being smart about it, because you don't want to, jump off the cliff without, I'm going to be badass. I'm going to jump off. I have no idea what, that's not to me what it is.
Right.
But it's being about being purposeful and having intention around what you want to do, and then setting yourself up to be successful. And that there's edge in that. I mean, I talk to people who want to create impact, and and it's great. That's the intention part, but there's hard work attached to that. Right? And I think the badass part is figuring what that looks like, and then setting yourself up so that you can actually do it.
Yeah, taking that action once you have that clarity. Yeah, that's beautiful. Beautiful definition. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So if people want to connect with you or learn more about you or have you come speak, how would you like folks to find you and connect?
Yeah. So LinkedIn is always a good one. I'm always open to people connecting with me on LinkedIn. I do have a website, very easy. It's my first name and last name. So it's Sinéad Condon .com. And in that, you get a sense of, what I like to do, what I'm passionate about, what value means to me. We talked about that earlier. And I love to connect with people, and certainly very passionate about helping people on their journeys.
And you do it so well, Sinéad. I really appreciate your time today. It's been such a pleasure and honor talking with you, because, your exposure in the world, the impact you've had, the continuous growth I see you going through, and it's just thank you. Thank you for sharing yourself today.
Oh, back at you, badass. You're welcome.
I love being part of your badass journey. So again, thanks for joining us, and I'll put your information in our show notes so people can connect with you. And again, I'm sure we'll chat real soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.